the Department of Homeland Security announced the transmission to the Federal Register of a Notice of Proposed Rulemaking NPRM, which regards the modification of registration requirement for petitioners seeking to file kept subject H-1B petitions. Ryan Sevcik, an immigration lawyer with Koley Jessen law firm in Omaha, Nebraska, is with me in the program today. How to understand this NPRM? What does it propose to change in respect with what is in place right now?
Absolutely. So what this proposed rulemaking would provide is it changes the manner in which H-1B petitions are selected in the lottery process. As everyone probably knows, the H-1B process is a capped visa program, meaning there's only a certain number of those visas that are available each year. And typically speaking, at least for the past several years in any event, the demand for those visa spots has far exceeded the supply. So when that happens, what the government does is they go through a lottery process where they randomly select and pick which of those submitted petitions actually is going to get adjudicated by USCIS. And to date, that process has been random. And so if there is the allowance for kind of two bites of the apple, if you will, if you have a master's degree or higher from a U.S. school. But that piece aside, it is a randomized process. Your chance of getting your petition selected is just as good as anybody else's who submitted that same day. What these proposed rules would do is change that from a completely random process to making it such that the USCIS would select petitions based on the higher wage rates that are being paid to workers. In effect, or at least the policy justification behind these proposed rules would be that you're reserving these H-1B petitions for those individuals who are being compensated highly and are, in theory, highly needed workers, as opposed to trying to bring workers in to drive down wages.
You kind of mentioned there that we had two types of those visas, one for public institutions and one from private institutions. The new regulation, the proposed one, will impact both categories, or still we're talking about just for the private organizations or companies that apply?
So these proposed rules would apply only to those petitions that are subject to the lottery. Just the cap subject petitions. So your educational institutions, et cetera, right now that aren't subject to the cap and aren't subject to the lottery, these regulations would not impact that group of H-1Bs. This would be kind of all the rest, all the private sector, public sector industries, et cetera, that aren't otherwise cap exempt.
Does it impact the renewal, H-1B renewal applications as well, if it goes into effect?
These new proposed rules would not. They're specifically dictated to show or to govern the H-1B lottery and cap selection process. Now, outside of the lottery process, we still have to deal with those higher wages that we discussed last week in the DOL's final regulations. But as far as this selection rate, that would not impact a normal H-1B extension.
I understand that this is just a proposed a proposed rulemaking, but do we have a time when does it go into effect?
At this point, we do not. So this is, as you mentioned, a proposed rule. So it is scheduled to be published in the Federal Register on November 2nd. What that means is that once it's published in the Register, people can then, the public, interested parties, you, me, anyone listening, can submit a comment, whether for, against, indifferent to these proposed rules. Once that comment period closes, what the agency does is it'll review those comments and in theory, potentially adjust the regulations, maybe suspend, not even publish the regulations, or not make them final. It might alter them, or it might just move ahead as they're drafted, basically take those comments into consideration and say, no, we're good with how we had structured this. Here is now the final rule that's going to get published. The timeline is indefinite, I would say, at this point. There are many situations where regulations get proposed and then never end up ultimately getting finalized. This could be one of those situations, or it could be a situation where as soon as that comment period closes, the agency then publishes what's called a final rule. And typically speaking, when that final rule is published, there'll then be an effective date tied to that date of publication, whether it be 30 days out, 60 days out, immediate effectiveness, et cetera.
It's a little bit different from the interim final rule that we discussed in our previous episode, right?
Correct. And the difference is that this is being published as a quote proposed rule, which means that the comment period comes before a final rule is issued. The ones we discussed previously were interim final rules. And so basically those rules are being published as if this is our final rule. We are taking comments, but this is the final rule, so here's the effective date. These current regulations are in a complete proposed stage, and at least in theory, the department would take into account any comments, commentary, et cetera, that are received during this public comment period. That'll be starting on Monday.
Okay, so we have the interim rule that we're waiting on, and then we have this rule that we're waiting on too. What do you predict what's going to happen with this category, with this working visa category? Those are major changes, not only in the way the who qualifies for that, but this proposed rule changes completely how you are selected for that visa, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And
what's the future?
It's a very good question. And a lot of that will likely depend on, or could depend on what happens this coming Tuesday in our national election. The current president's policies and stance with respect to this category in particular has been to, at the forefront, again, from his policy perspective and justification, is the protection of U.S. workers and U.S. jobs. If we have a second term of President Trump, it's very likely that these regulations or some form of them could be finalized. And then it's anybody's guess as to what happens at that point. Will there be judicial challenges like we discussed last time? Some sort of a claim that these types of changes are beyond the authority of the agencies making these changes. So it's a little bit up in the air. If the election were to go the other way, hard to say at that point as well. Again, we're in this proposed period. So is this something that a different administration is going to move forward with? Is this a policy that they would move forward with such that they would continue to direct these agencies to finalize these rules for publication and effectiveness?
Right now, everything is up in the air. We cannot really say with certainty what's going to happen.
That's correct. Yep. The only thing I would say, and I would tell everybody listening, if they do have comments or thoughts on these regulations, what we can all do is on Monday, when that public comment period opens, you absolutely have the ability to go online and submit comments to these regulations.
Who can place the comment?
Anybody and everybody. So everybody can log in right now, and you can absolutely, or not right now, but on Monday you can log in and make those comments as you wish.
Okay, and the last question that I have is not a question actually. We stress here, Ryan, that this is what we provide here is just information and it's not advice. However, there are at least 65,000 candidates that are in this category. What would you say to those candidates or applicants that are waiting on their status?
Stuff like this makes people very anxious, and rightly so. We're dealing with people's lives and trying to figure out course of careers and all those sorts of things. And oftentimes that hangs in the balance with monumental changes such as these. What I would say to people in that situation, as hard as it may sound, try and put a pin in it for at least a little bit. Give it a couple weeks here and see how all this develops. And the reason I say that is because, again, we're talking about regulations, and know that makes a lot of people anxious, but it's hard to speculate on and plan for all the what if scenarios rather than planning once we have a definitive, this is going to be the rule or it's not going to be the rule.
Well, thank you so much, Ryan. I certainly appreciate your thoughts in this moment, because you are right. We, even in our website and in our viewership, we did notice that rise of panic among our viewers. So very helpful. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.